In my last two videos, we have explored two storylines in Classic World of Warcraft, forgotten or missed by many people in the player base. And although it is tempting to venture southward into the heartlands of the Eastern Kingdoms or across the sea to Kalimdor to share with you all new stories from distant lands, I can't leave this corner of Azeroth without talking about one more story. A story that many of you are probably familiar with, but also one that demonstrates a very dramatic shift in Blizzard's writing over the years when it comes to World of Warcraft. That all said, let us return to Tirisfal Glades one last time and talk about the most dangerous spot in this entire zone, the one place that has claimed the lives of untold multitudes of players over all these years. This is one of the saddest stories in Classic World of Warcraft. Before I begin, I have to give a quick shout out to this channel's sponsor, Zygor, linked down below in the description. It is World of Warcraft's Ultimate Guide add-on, and you can use code Nixxiom for 20% off your purchase if you feel like getting Zygor after checking out their free trial. The town of Brill is one of the most iconic locations in World of Warcraft, and its tavern is legendary among the community. Amidst the haunted woods of Tirisfal Glades is this one spot, this one refuge that gives off a cozy quality to it, almost as if the Forsaken still hold on to this small piece of humanity that they once carried. And yet, even within the warmth of Brill's Inn, there is still the overbearing chill of death, especially as you encounter the quests that can be found here. In one example, Gretchen Deadmar tells you of how cold death is for her, and before long, the mindless state will soon be upon her due to the influence of the plague of undeath, and so she wants you to help her create a simple blanket so that she can wrap the dead in its linens, a final act of service to the Dark Lady before she falls into insanity. This is not the story that we're covering today in this video, but it does reveal to us an important piece of lore that will be useful for us to understand later on. The fact that the Forsaken ultimately fall into what's called the mindless state due to the undeath decaying away every last remnant of their sanity. Regrettably, this is actually a piece of lore that Blizzard seems to have forgotten since they initially wrote it into the story back during Classic WoW. And I find this particular reveal about the Forsaken and their undeath to be very chilling, because it gives us a new perspective on many of those mindless undead that we're killing amongst Tirisfal Glades. Some, sure, they're members of the Scourge, but there are likely many that were forsaken, just like you, that simply faded away into a mindless nothingness, now roaming the woods without thought or purpose. Before they fall to madness, Forsaken apothecaries recruit you to help create a new plague of undeath so that the Forsaken might inflict the living with the same curse that they suffer. Scarlet Crusaders must be dealt with, who see the Forsaken as mindless undead despite their attempts to rebuild some of what was once their kingdom of Lordaeron. Strange gnolls can be found stealing bodies from graves, which we talked about in my previous video on Classic WoW's Best Forgotten Villain. And then amongst all these tasks and all these things that you have to do as a player, there's Coleman Farthing, a mysterious NPC that sits quietly in Brill's tavern, waiting for would-be adventurers to hear his tragic story.
The Agamand family was the most prosperous family in Tirisfal Glades. I used to work their mills. Before the plague, the Agamands fortified their home and convinced those in their employ to remain and help them defend. We were fools, but at least we were loyal fools. The Agamands in their pride doomed us to undeath. Now, they are minions of the Scourge. Serve the Forsaken by defeating the Agamands who fell to the plague. Serve me by bringing me their remains.
The Agamand Mills area, located in the north of Tirisfal Glades, has always been one of my favorite locations in World of Warcraft for many reasons. It was here that I made my first friend in the game, but it was also in this haunted corner of the woods that I first got my sense of World of Warcraft's world. Before I even arrived and emerged from that crypt in Deathnell, there apparently had been this battle that had occurred in the north of Tirisfal, where a family determined to hold fast to their home, chose to defend themselves against the scourge rather than flee from the oncoming undead. And although this perhaps seems like foolishness, especially with how they recruited their servants and workers to fight against really impossible odds, there's actually a lot more depth to this story than one might realize at first glance. Now, Coleman Farthing, he clearly has no love for the Agamands, and he tasks you with killing every member of the family that he knew in his life who were raised into undeath. Gregor, Nissa, and Thurman. Clearly, the battle for Agamand Mills didn't go so well, and none apparently survived what happened all those years ago up in the north of the zone. And as you're about to leave to venture to these haunted lands, Coleman stops you a second time for another quest. And in this one, you're told about a specific member of the Agamand family, Devlin Agamand.
He was the younger of the two sons in the Agamand family, and in life the two could not have been more different. Thurman was tall and gentle, while his younger brother was weak and sharp-tongued. When Agamand Mills fell to the plague, I was not surprised to hear that Devlin was quick to succumb. His mad chattering can still be heard near the road leading to the Agamand Mills. I'm collecting the remains of the Agamands, and I want poor Devlin. Find him, destroy him, and bring me his bones.
Now, clearly Coleman has a particular vendetta against this specific member of the family, but we're not told the reason as to why, other than apparently Devlin was kind of annoying in life compared to his brother. And is that really a good reason for Coleman to hate him with such a passion? Well, maybe there's more to this story than what Coleman is telling us. So let's get our supplies and head to the Agamand Mills and see where the road takes us. Now, when you first arrive at the Agamand Mills, it will probably take your breath away at just how many scourge are present in this small area. The windmills are crawling with skeletal mages, soldiers, as well as other reanimated undead servants, who we will be discussing here soon. It's amongst all these horrors, though, that your search begins for the members of the Agamand family, and it's likely, due to his location near the south of the mills, that the first one that you will find is Devlin. You discover that he has this unique skeletal mage model compared to the other skeleton mages in the area, and upon attacking him, he will taunt you with lines like, "Join the Scourge," and "Came to visit the family? Die, fool." Maybe it's just the fact that he's a member of the Scourge, but Devlin seems to be very pro-Scourge. Anyway, he isn't a very difficult fight, so you'll make quick work of the youngest Agamand, and his last words, admittingly, can be quite haunting. He says, "Mother, oh mother, you should have listened to me." Even in his undeath, clearly Devlin had some remnant of his humanity that remained that made him think of his mother during his final moments. But we can't delay. We're still surrounded by many enemies, and there's other members of this mysterious family to kill. But why does Devlin have this really cool, unique skeletal mage model? Why is he yelling at us to join the Scourge and seemingly mocking his own family? Well, we don't really know, but perhaps moments after slaying Devlin, you might find something curious, assuming that you're a little lucky. Killing any of the skeletal mages in the Agamand Mills has a chance to drop an unsent letter from Thurman Agamand, the older brother of Devlin. And in this letter, we learn quite a lot about what happened here at the Agamand Mills, a lot of what Coleman did not tell us. Honestly, I was tempted to just give you all a quick overview of what this letter says, but considering that many watching this probably have never read Thurman's letter, I figured I'll just read it in its entirety. It's not that long.
Dearest Yvette, I will entrust this letter to our fastest runner. I pray he can find a way through the forces surrounding us. I pray you read these words, for they are the last you will hear of me. My only comfort in these dark days is the relief I feel, knowing that you are free of my fate. I fear my father made a grave error when he decided to remain and defend our home. The forces of the Scourge rage through Tirisfal Glades, and although we are well fortified and well stocked, after the betrayal of my brother Devlin, we lack the strength and numbers to withstand their continued assault. If you receive this letter, Yvette, then know that Devlin is a traitor. Devlin despaired and sought an escape from our ill fortunes, and in doing so, he made a pact with the Scourge. I do not know what price was promised him for his betrayal, but I'm sure it was laced with lies. If you see my brother, then flee from him. He is a fiend. A few nights ago, he murdered 2 of our watchmen and led a small group of Scourge through the breach, leading them to where many more of us slept. Their ambush was brutal. They slew a third of us before we could take them down. Now, we barely have enough men to watch our borders. It's only a matter of time before our wearying guard drops and the Scourge attack. And although I saw Devlin's face amidst the desperate men and the gaunt-faced Scourge on that accursed night, he slipped away before I could catch him. He might be dead, or he might still live as an agent of the Scourge. Either way, he is a monster. Devlin warned us that if we tried to face the Scourge, then we were doomed. He told us this when they first entered Tirisfal Glades, well before they encircled our home. Perhaps he was pleading with us to leave, or perhaps he was gloating. It was always hard to understand Devlin's motives. Since he was a child, he was a mystery to us. But he was right. We are doomed. The Agamand family line will end. Although I still live, I know I soon will be dead. I'm not afraid, and I do not regret remaining with my family, but my last thoughts will be of you. Live on, my beloved Yvette, and I will find peace. Thurman.
There's really a lot to unpack here, everybody. First of all, the most obvious, clearly the reason why Coleman Farthing back in Brill has this vendetta against Devlin in particular is because it was Thurman's youngest brother who betrayed the Agamand family and its defenders. It was because of Devlin that Coleman suffers the fate that he does. But more than that, this letter also reveals just how kind-hearted Thurman was in his life, which is something that Coleman told us early on, and how despite knowing that Thurman was going to die, despite knowing his end was near, he found this great comfort in the idea of his love, Yvette, being able to live on happily without him. Sadly, though, we do deliver this letter to Yvette, and we realize that Thurman's hopes ultimately were for naught, for she too was killed by the Scourge, raised into undeath, and now she walks as a Forsaken. When we deliver this letter to her, she tells us that she begged Thurman to leave Agamand Mills while they were still alive, but he was too loyal to his family, and she mourns him, at least for a moment, and then tells us that holding any regrets is for weaklings, and she has no loyalty or affection any longer to those that she might have loved in her life. Her only purpose now is in service to the Forsaken and the Dark Lady. I think 2 things are curious about this particular interaction with Yvette. The first being that this woman is revealed to be the daughter of Coleman. So perhaps while her father was defending Agamand Mills with Thurman, Yvette was maybe hidden away elsewhere by her father for safety. Regardless though, both her father and her shared the same fate. There was no escaping the wrath of the Scourge, it seems. But the second observation is something that is a repeated theme throughout Forsaken quests in Classic WoW. Something that many of you might not be aware of, and it's this. The Forsaken, they might remember the lives that they had before, but they don't care anything for them. Not for who they once were, not for the people they once loved, or what their former passions might have been. The Forsaken now live only for themselves, for their people, for their Dark Lady, and to afflict the world with the same ugliness that they now carry. But we're going to talk more about that later, because right now, we have to return to the mills. The rest of the Agamand family is scattered amongst the ruined windmills. Thurman is nothing more than a large zombie now. Gregor is a ghoul, and Nissa is a banshee. All of which may give you a little bit of trouble finding and killing due to all the surrounding undead mages and soldiers of the Scourge, but you will manage. Soon, the remains of all the members of the Agamand family will be in your inventory, and when you return to Coleman to present what you've gathered, this is what he says.
Revenge has a sweet taste, don't you think? When you destroyed the Agamands, did you catch Any hint of free will within them? I hope so. I hope they knew fear before they were smashed into oblivion. It is a foolish hope, I know, but it is a hope that I foster nonetheless.
You know, something I always loved about this quest is that it shows us just how cruel and complex the Forsaken are. I mean, really think about it. Coleman knows that Devlin was the one that betrayed him and the Agamand family. It wasn't Thurman or Gregor or Nissa who stood beside Coleman in defense of the mills. And yet, despite this, Coleman doesn't care. He hates all of the Agamands equally simply because it was their decision to remain at their home that caused him his undeath. But what's curious is nobody forced Coleman to stay and fight with the Agamands. He even admits this. Hell, Yvette, his own daughter, she was begging Thurman and her father to leave, but neither of them listened. Coleman's death, therefore, in some ways was of his own doing, and yet he blames the Agamands for it. He even delights in the idea of this family still having some of their free will present as you slay them, because he loves the idea of terror being present in their hearts as they're killed by you. When you look at Coleman Farthing, you see somebody very three-dimensional in terms of who he is and his relationship to his own death as well as his undeath. And maybe it's tempting for us to say that he's being evil or irrational or unnecessarily cruel, but he's forsaken. He doesn't even care anymore. His heart, or what remains of it, is only in service to ridding the world of the Scourge, taking a revenge against the Lich King, and inflicting harm through the Forsaken's new plague of undeath on all the living of Azeroth, so that they too might know death and its cold like the Forsaken do. Maybe the Tauren of Mulgore are innocent, the Orcs, the humans of Stormwind, the Dwarves, and so on, but the Forsaken don't care. Like the Agamand family, the world is nothing more than something for them to take out their anger and anguish on. And this is one of the reasons why the Forsaken are one of my favorite races in World of Warcraft. Because whatever they were in their lives, now they're downright evil, you could argue. And it's sad that Blizzard unfortunately didn't continue this type of storytelling with the Forsaken going into later expansions. They kind of turned them more into like weary souls longing for family and reconnection. In later lore, for example, in Battle for Azeroth, you even have moments where the Forsaken attempt to reconnect with family members still living in the Alliance. Why would the Forsaken do this? Why would they care? Could you imagine Coleman Farthing doing this? I certainly can't. I mean, Coleman has you kill his daughter's former lover in life just so that he can collect his remains and put them on his mantelpiece. And his daughter, standing just a few feet away, she doesn't even care. I mean, that is the Forsaken in Classic WoW. They're kind of scary. And you know, when it comes to this story, there is one question that still remains in regards to this whole Agamand Mills quest. And that is, why did all of this happen in the first place? Why did the Agamand family care so much about defending a couple of mills? They could have just ran. They clearly had a ton of land. They probably had a ton of money. They could have taken a boat and sailed away. So what gives? Well, we've already gotten some clues as to the answer to this, but the final answer to the question is revealed in one of the follow-up quests. But it isn't revealed in the quest text, but in a visual sort of way, which is one of my favorite types of storytelling in World of Warcraft. So after helping Coleman with slaying the Agamand family, he sends you to the local magistrate of Brill, who tells you that he wants you to return to the mills and slaughter a powerful necromantic skeleton of the Scourge called Captain Dargle. Now, we're told that this captain has been raising the ancestors of the Agamands as undead, and he's slowly establishing the mills as a military foothold for the Scourge. And obviously, this cannot be allowed. And as we're doing this quest, making our way through those haunted mills yet again to that family crypt located near the rear of the property, this is when that final question gets answered for us. Because you see, Captain Dargle is protected by not just a few, but a ton of ancestral zombies and ghosts that all occupy this crypt and the surrounding area. So much so that this is the first quest that you will likely encounter as a Forsaken player that demands that you find somebody to help you, as there's just so many enemies to deal with on your own. And that multitude of enemies shows us why the Agamands stayed here on this land to defend it, despite the impossible odds stacked against them. It's because, look at all these ghosts and zombies. These are all the ancestors of the Agamands, going back generation upon generation upon generation. Husbands, wives, sons, daughters. The Agamands, we have been told at several points in their story that they were a people that loved their family. They were even willing to die for it. Yvette, she pleaded with Thurman to run away from the mills before the Scourge arrived, but he couldn't abandon his little brother Devlin, his mother or his father, and the family as a whole. They couldn't leave behind their honored dead to watch their ancestors be raised as zombies and skeletons to fight for the Scourge. Could you leave behind your dead family members to succumb to such a fate? The Agamand family, although we never actually get to meet them in the sense of talk with them, clearly they demonstrate that they were a family that truly cared about one another. They truly cared about their land and those that came before them, and they were willing to lay down their very lives in defense of that family. I remember all those years ago doing this quest for the first time back in 2005, and what a contrast this quest suddenly revealed to me. On one hand, you have this family tragically betrayed by the youngest sibling who maybe, just maybe, might have been able to hold out against the Scourge had that not happened. But they died, surrounded by one another, and were raised into undeath together, as well as their grandparents and their parents and others, all of their ancestors in their family crypt. And despite this tragedy that happened to these people, Coleman and Yvette Farthing and the Forsaken in Brill, they don't care. They don't care about these people and who they were in life and what they believed in and what they stood for. The Forsaken only are concerned with the destruction of the Scourge. The Agamands, they are mere foes to be slaughtered by the Forsaken war machine in service to the Dark Lady. I mentioned at the beginning of this video the quest that revealed to us the lore that Forsaken ultimately fall into madness, a mindless state of being. And think about that for a moment in relationship to this quest. One day, all the Forsaken will succumb and fall into madness. But before that time comes, they will slaughter anyone who stands in their way, living, undead, or otherwise. And things like feelings for those that the Forsaken once knew in life, past loves, family, whatever, all of that is weakness that gets in the way of the Forsaken's ultimate goal. Truly, even though the Forsaken have broken free of the Lich King's control, in many ways, these people are still monsters. And that is why, at least in my opinion, this very short questline in Tirisfal Glades is one of the saddest storylines in Classic World of Warcraft, because it shows just how little humanity remains in the Forsaken, who sit quietly awaiting their revenge in those whispering halls of the Undercity.